Hey guys, I'm Angela and welcome back to Hobby Night. Recently on the channel, you may have seen me build up and paint the Panzer 38T. And while I did do a fair amount of research to figure out exactly aesthetically what this tank should look like, I didn't look into the history of the tank or how it actually fared in the war. And so today I figured we would wrap up my time with the Panzer 38 with a video that I found on YouTube on the Megaprojects page, because it's all about the Panzer 38 and how it was a little bit of an underrated tank in World War II. And that has me very fascinated. So without further ado, I think we'll watch this together and react to it. All right, I got my headphones on. We've got the video in full screen. Let's go ahead and react.
What springs to mind when you think of a great World War II tank? Perhaps the mighty Tiger, bristling.
I mean, the Tiger is often mentioned to me whenever I ask people what maybe I should build next, so I could definitely see how that might spring to mind first.
With armor and firepower, or the T-34, the
T-34 is actually another one that is often thrown into my comments and going, you should build the T-34 next, build it, build it, build it. And I'm like, I might, but right now we're building the Sherman and we're learning about the Panzer 38T.
Durable backbone of the Soviet forces. These machines of war, with their legendary status, are often the stars
They're
of the
pretty
show
legendary, aren't
when
they?
we reflect on the major battles of the era. But
You know, I do wonder if it's just because they end up being like the largest of the tanks. And well, I mean, I guess they also have really big moments in the war, right? There's really big pivotal points in history where some of these tanks were used. And so they end up just being more famous than potentially something like the 38T.
But so often the reality of these mighty machines does not match their legend. The Tiger, for instance, was plagued by unreliability and came with
Really? I think I have heard that a little bit, but people are always talking about the Tiger. And so I find that very fascinating that it was plagued with just unreliability like that.
a staggering price tag. The T-34, on the other
Oh,
hand,
and it was
suffered
also
from
expensive,
lack of
okay.
consistent quality in manufacturing, severely compromising its utility on the battlefield. Undoubtedly, this paints them as highly overrated, and in naturally spot.
I do wonder, leave me a message in the comments. Do you find the Tiger or the 34T overrated? Because I would love to know if that is a opinion actually shared by a lot of the tank community, or if that is just hyperbole that has heard maybe hearsay by like a vocal minority.
Sparks a couple of questions. What does deserve our praise? What tank thus far has been consistently
Yes, what does
overlooked
deserve our
as
praise?
to be the most underrated tank of the war? The highly contended.
You know, I haven't actually watched that much footage of tanks in real life blowing up, but to actually see them just have the top fly off so dramatically like that, very cool. Also seems very terrifying.
Just question? Certainly, and doubtless all of you have your own suggestions, but today we're going to be making the case for the tiny little Czech Panzer 30.
I did not realize that when I first built this tank. I really thought it was a German tank. I, in fact, thought this was the Panzer I, and that I was building like the first in the core Panzer line for the German tanks. So when I had a like bazillion comments in my very first Panzer 38T video, I was told so many times how it's like, no, actually, this is a Czech tank. It's a Czech tank. I will never forget that. It is ingrained in my brain now.
38T. Now, this may seem like a bit of an odd proposal at first, as it is
Oh,
hardly
it is
a
caked in
ferocious
mud.
thing to behold, and yet despite its unassuming appearance, the little 38T is one of the few tanks that was in service for the entire duration of the war.
Wow, really? It was in service for the entire duration of the war? That's really cool. I actually didn't know if how common or not common that was. I know they went through so many variations of tanks and they were rapidly produced with those new variants throughout the wars. And so therefore I kind of assumed most tanks were replaced by a different version of themselves, or just a completely new version of a just much superior tank as they just kept innovating. So the fact that the 38T actually made it through the entirety of the war is really cool to hear.
And remained viable while doing so. And yet, what do you ever hear about it? Nothing, really.
I mean, until I had made the error in my own video and put that out there, I actually had not heard that much about the 38T. In fact, I had heard so little about it that I didn't even realize it was not German and not part of the main Panzer line.
Really? I mean, where are the dramatic, overhyped TV documentaries? Where are the movies in which it
Where are
plays
there?
center stage? Where is the appreciation for this fantastic little tank.
It's on my channel. In fact, Hobby Night very much appreciates the Panzer 38T. And so that's where all it is. We've concentrated it into this one channel, and I guess this video, because I imagine he probably appreciates 38T too, but we're just gonna say it's on my channel.
It's nowhere. So today we're going to be doing our part to right this wrong by showing you its history, its combat performance, and ultimately making the case for why we believe this is the most underrated tank of the whole war.
Okay, I will admit, that is a little bit of a bold claim. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with him, and I am hoping that he will prove that lack of disagreeing to be worthwhile, but that is a big, bold claim.
Let's jump in.
The tank!
The 38T was originally designed and produced for the Czechoslovak military, and it was known as the LTVZ-38, short for Light Tank Model 33.
Light Tank Model 33. Now, that's something that I have actually noticed in a lot of tank designs. They end up just being abbreviations for essentially whatever the country's term for light tank, and then whatever number they are. And I don't know why they do that. If somebody could explain it to me specifically down in the comments, that'd be awesome. Because like, I assume what it is that they're just trying to keep it relatively simple. And it's like, well, this is the 38th design we have come up with for our tanks in the light division. Therefore, it is 38. But like, is it that simple? Like, is it actually that simple?
Czechoslovakia, known for its modest but sophisticated interwar armament industry, saw the need for an improved light tank following the lackluster performance of its earlier LTVZ-35, and thus the 38T was conceived.
This is actually one of the images, just to like pause him really briefly, that I used when I was referencing what color I was going to make my tank. Because if you look at my tank, which is a nice sort of dark blue-gray color tone, this tank also has a nice blue-gray dark color tone. And so I really liked that. I think the majority of the tanks painted up that way, and I just had to go with it.
With the design being finalized in 1938. German eyes were originally drawn to the 38T when Czechoslovakia, in an effort to maintain peace, agreed to partial annexation in September 1938. This placed some...
Agreed to partial annexation? I feel like that's putting it kind of lightly, if I put it honestly.
Outlying production facilities into German hands, who then began evaluating the 38T for their own use. They liked what they saw, and with the full annexation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939, they also gained full control of its production facilities, the bulk of which were situated just outside of Prague. With the 38T already having been shown to tick all of the German boxes, full production was ordered to continue, with the tanks now destined to serve the Wehrmacht as...
It is amazing just how many of them were made, and like seeing them roll around together. They really are quite small looking, aren't they? Especially when you see the crewmen sitting on the top there like that. It really doesn't feel that big. And I know it's a light tank. It's meant to be small. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, especially if you're enjoying the content that you find here. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, well, my Only Fanatics VIP page is currently 50% off through the end of the month for new subscribers. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, use the link in the video description below, and I hope to see you there. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video.
The 38T boasted a robust construction. It was powered by a 6-cylinder petrol
Wait, it only had 125 horsepower?
Engine which provided 125 horsepower and pushed the tank up to a top
125 horsepower. That is that's less than what I think my car has currently. So it really didn't move that fast. I mean, I know tanks don't move that fast because they're big and heavy, but like, whoa.
Speed of 42 kph. It had a combat weight of 9.5 tons and a robust suspension system that employed large diameter road wheels, ensuring decent cross.
You know, I think I actually did notice that when I was building my own tank in comparison to the Sherman that I'm currently building. Because when I was building this one, I did notice that these are a lot bigger than I see on even my Merkava and the Sherman. And whereas they have like smaller ones, and I don't know why specifically the difference, like what the benefit necessarily to having the smaller ones versus the larger ones, or vice versa, might be for a tank. But it is something like cool that I did actually notice when I was building it.
Cross-country performance. Armor range from 15mm to 50mm, depending on the specific part of the vehicle and its version. Its primary armament was the Skoda A737mm gun, a decent enough little gun for its day. This was complemented by two 7.92mm machine guns, one.
So the machine guns, when I was building my tank, I was afraid I almost broke one. I just wanted to like throw that out there. Of one thing that did happen when I was building it is I was putting I think it was this little one in, the smaller one that's in the front that we can see here. And I think I used like a little bit too much glue because it started to like bow in a weird way. And I almost snapped it on the back side that was actually going into the tank where you wouldn't see it. So thankfully I got it to like situate. Oh no, it was the top one. No, actually it might've been both of them because I glued them in place to basically secure it, because they don't move anymore. And that's the reason that it actually ended up being glued in place, was specifically for that reason.
Coaxially mounted with the main gun and the other positioned in the hull. Now, these figures are fantastic and all if you're technically minded, but what use are they to us today?
Which, as a war gamer, I kind of am. I actually did really enjoy seeing the technical rundown of the tank, even though sometimes I don't always have the best understanding of it compared to other things, because I just don't have that knowledge, but it is really cool to hear.
Without something to compare them to. So in this precious pursuit of context, let's see how the 38T stacked up against the Panzer II, Germany.
Okay. When I went and actually bought the 38T, I think this Panzer II was the tank that I was actually meaning to buy, because I wanted to get the earliest in the core Panzer line from the German tanks. And I think this is what I should have gotten. So maybe in the future, this will be one that I build.
His equivalent light tank.
And then I can compare them.
We see that the Panzer II was very much lesser than its Czech counterpart. While the Panzer II was similarly nimble with a top speed of 40 kph coming from a 140 horsepower petrol engine,
I still can't believe how small of it, like,
and was widely decried as uncomfortable and unergonomic. Furthermore, the Panzer II was more...
I wonder why it was so unergonomic. Like, I mean, I can't imagine a tank in general would be very ergonomic because it's a bunch of steel and metal and just maybe some leather padding in there. But I feel like whenever you see the interiors of tanks, they're always just sparse. And if you banged into anything, you'd definitely be bruised up because it's all just raw metal and everything. So I do wonder what made it so extra uncomfortable.
More fragile.
Maybe you're just very cramped because it's so small.
Being only 30mm. The Panzer II's main armament was also decidedly weaker, with its main armament being a 20mm autocannon compared to the larger 37mm cannon on the 38T. Now, 37mm is not exactly ridiculously big by any stretch, but it at least gave the 38T true anti-armor capabilities that...
Oh, okay. So it actually could penetrate through some other... Well, I guess if its armor was relatively thick and even the Panzer II's armor was less thick than the 38T's, then if the 38T was going up against other lighter tanks, then yeah, it probably was penetrating their armor if they were not as robust, right? That would make sense to me.
The two sorely lacked. So now we know why.
Oh, I never saw this one when I was looking for it. That's such a pretty, like, lighter blue. Now, I noticed that there's some like cracking on the front of the hull there. Is that just age, or is this a model that's been weathered? Like, I actually can't tell if this is a real tank or not.
At least on paper, the 38T had the makings of a perfectly decent little tank. So let's move on to look at how this technical performance played out on the real-world battlefield.
Yes, let's. I want to know how it did in the war!
At the outset of war, on the 1st of September 1939, Germany had a supply of 78 38Ts, enough to fully arm a single regiment.
Only that many? I would have... I mean, I guess because the Czechs were the ones who were actually producing them, and I don't know how much they were needing them prior to World War II. So, I mean, I guess maybe some, but maybe not a huge number. So that was probably explained the smaller amount.
Regiment. The 67th Panzer Battalion of the newly minted 3rd Light Division received the biggest complement of these 78 tanks and thus serves...
All right, I'm going to have to look more into the 3rd Light Division then, because I want to, like, I assume he's going to go into it a little bit, but probably not in an extreme amount of detail. And I'd love to know more about exactly which battles maybe this tank was involved in.
As an excellent case study for us. The battalion consisted of 4 companies, each containing 1 platoon equipped with Panzer IIs and 2 38Ts.
Okay, so each company had a platoon in it with at least 2 38Ts and then a certain number of Panzer IIs. I wonder how many more Panzer IIs Germany actually had over the 38Ts at this time at the beginning when they would have fully taken control of Czechoslovakia and like gotten all of their tanks.
During the invasion of Poland, it was sent into combat at the battles of Bzura River and Kalasine, among others, where it performed very well indeed. Only 6 tanks were completely lost overall, and 2 of those were 38.
That's not bad. So 4, I guess, Panzer IIs were lost, and then only 2 38Ts. That's cool.
But it was not all sunshine and rainbows for the 67th 38Ts, as the Polish campaign exposed its chief shortcoming: its thin armor. Thicker than the Panzer IIs it may have been, but thick enough it was not, and it proved extremely vulnerable to 7.9mm.
Ooh. Yeah, I was wondering how it itself, like, if it could penetrate other light tanks' armor, I wonder how much armor-piercing rifles and ballistics and larger tanks. Like, what happens when it starts fighting the larger tanks? I wonder. I'm sure he'll get to it.
WZ-35 anti-tank rifles and 37mm W.
Okay, I'm sorry, but like immediately, this reminds me of the ordnance, battery ordnance that I painted up for my guard. And then also every time I see a trench shovel, I always think of Kriegsguardsmen, like of just the Kriegers. Like they just, oh, it's so cool looking. I completely see where the inspiration comes from. Also, is that an auto cannon? I do think the guard can take an autocannon, can't they, for their ordinances? Maybe I'll build one and base it off of like this shot or something. That'd be cool.
36 anti-tank cannons, both of which could pretty happily penetrate the 38T's frontal armor at ranges of 100
Not good though
meters
for the
and 300 meters
38T,
respectively. As for the Polish 75mm field guns, well, they went through that armor like a knife goes through butter.
I can imagine. Look at it. It's like the size. I feel like the tank isn't that much larger, like lengthwise, than that gun. I mean, I know it probably is, but perspective-wise, it's just that's a big gun on that.
But it should be noted,
or big
thin
cannon,
armor was not a problem exclusive to the Czechoslovak design. Rather, it was prevalent among nearly all light tanks of that period.
Well, okay, wait a minute. Duh, is that not a duh moment? Am I being silly here? I thought light tanks, the whole point of why they were considered light tanks was because they had light armor. Is the light referring to something else when it comes to light tanks? And therefore, is it also referring to something else with the heavy tanks as well? Because I would have, again, assumed that the heavy portion of heavy tank was because it was more armored. What else could it be related to? For some reason, I'm just not thinking of anything else that would be associated with that.
We already know about the thin armor of the Panzer II, but other examples include the French H-35,
That is an adorable little tank.
which maxed out at 40
You said it was
millimeters.
French?
The Polish 70p, the
Oh my god. Okay, I know that in some of my live streams where I've been working on my tanks, chat and I have talked about various smaller tanks, and I've looked up some of them, but I have not looked up all of them, and these are delightful. I'm gonna have to remember all these because I will look into seeing if I can find kits for some of these, because like that French one especially, so cute. I want to build it.
Out at 17, the Japanese Type 9.
I want to build that one too. Oh my god. The Hago light tank. Okay. I love
25 Hago
these.
that maxed out at just 12. So certainly the 38T was lacking, but as far as light
Seems like it
tanks
actually
went,
was the
it
higher
really
up of
was among the best of the bunch.
of the tanks,
Following
actually.
Poland, the 38T's next combat was during the throes of the Battle of France, by which point, with the factories being hard at work, the Germans
I actually didn't know that I didn't know this tank ended up going into France. That's really cool.
now had over 200
Probably less cool for the
descended
French.
into battle, enough to make up 13% of their total tank force. Now this presents an interesting opportunity for analysis, because with the number of tanks sent to Poland being comparatively modest, perhaps their performance there was just a fluke, and a bigger sample size would reveal some kind of issue that was previously hidden. And to answer this, let's zoom in and focus on the 7th Panzer Division, led by the infamous Erwin Rommel.
Why is he infamous? Why is Rommel specifically infamous? Erwin Rommel? Because I do not know, but I'd love for somebody to tell me.
By far the most renowned of the two divisions equipped with 38Ts in France. Doing this certainly looks good for...
I just want to pause briefly because I don't feel like I look at strategy maps from World War II or really any of the wars very often. And something that I actually would love to have answered by those of you that also play stuff like Flames of War, Bolt Action, or any other historical war game that uses tanks and vehicles and all of that kind of thing. Because when you're doing the historical like reenactments via the miniature games, are you actually trying to follow these kinds of movements on these maps specifically? Because that's what I assume is happening, but I've never actually participated in like a historical war game scenario, especially not with like the GMT boxes, for example, like those really classic war games that you would like that were really expensive. They're weirdly really expensive. But I imagine like they have these kinds of maps in them, possibly even using like specific maps that were used in the war, hence the historical nature of it. So like, tell me, is that what you're doing?
The 38T, as under Rommel's command, it served as the linchpin of Germany's sickle cut maneuver through the Ardennes, the one that led to the Allied forces being completely split up, cut off, and, well, decimated. With this maneuver, the 38...
So because of being a military brat and where I ended up getting a portion of my world history and then not getting the second half of my world history lessons, which involved like World War I and World War II, I actually don't know that much about either of the wars. And that's new to me. I did not know that. I mean, I'm not surprised that potentially the forces for the Allies got split up like that, but not something I'd specifically heard of.
The was being used in a way that perfectly exploited its strengths and minimized its weaknesses, using the exceptional mobility and speed of the tank to avoid direct clashes with...
That's probably what it's referring to, isn't it? I bet the light and heavy tank, because he just said speed, is it light tank because of how fast it's going and therefore heavy tank because of how slow it's going? I bet I'm sure comments have already told me how what I just discovered may or may not be correct, but that's my new theory.
With the more numerous French armored forces. However,
also, they were actually moving pretty fast. It's pretty impressive.
To outmaneuver your opponent, but no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and sometimes you'll have to commit your forces in suboptimal ways. So how did Rommel manage when his 38Ts had to go toe-to-toe with the mighty...
Whoa, that just looks devastating. And also a little bit more Warhammery to me. Like, is the Char B1 a remnant of World War I? Because I feel like it has that vibe more than I'm used to for what I see predominantly for World War II tanks.
The Char B1 heavy tank, a tank that on paper seemed almost tailor-designed to ruin a 38 crewman's day? The answer to that question comes on the 15th of May 1940 when the 25th Panzer Regiment encountered an entire company of Char B1s outside Flavia. His response to which was to hold the 38Ts back and have his mighty 88mm anti-aircraft guns point their muzzles down from the sky and blow the B1s apart. Now, this may sound like a solid L for the 38Ts, as they found themselves completely outmatched against the B1.
I assume he's about to say this, but no, that's just using your tanks correctly and not throwing them away because you have them and you want to use them. Like, I have this problem all the time in Warhammer where certain units, especially if they're newer units that I'm not used to using, I will just horrifically use them incorrectly and they'll get destroyed. And then I will come back and use them again correctly, and suddenly they'll be working really, really well. Like, I had this problem with my Plague Burst Crawler back when I was using my Death Guard a lot, and I even have it modernly with my Tyranids. Like, my Von Ryan Leapers, I was using horribly wrong when I first started playing with them, and then at one point, I, reread a rule, and something all just went snap into place, and I figured out, oh, I should be doing that. And it just worked way better. So yeah, it's just effective use of your tools.
And had to rely on other hardware to see the day right. But maybe this interpretation is just a bit too narrow. A tank is a machine after all, and machines are built for specific reasons to fulfill specific niches.
Okay, he is gonna basically, I feel like he's going in this direction, because yeah, exactly. They are made for specific things. There's a specific niche that certain tanks and other machines are meant for, and if you use them inadequately, then yeah, they're probably going to have a higher rate of failure.
No machine, much less a tank, is ever going to be perfect, so perhaps instead our takeaway from this should be that the 38T excelled when deployed correctly, and like all tanks, it would fail catastrophically if it was misused.
Exactly.
More evidence for this grounded interpretation of the 38T's capabilities comes from the 19th of May, when Rommel's tanks found themselves on the approach to Arras. Here, the 38Ts clashed with French.
Just want to take a look again at the map a little bit to see the motion. So it looks like Rommel's the red. I don't know what the black is. SS, so maybe it's Russian. And then I'm assuming blue is the Allies, but I don't actually see them labeled specifically.
British units in what would eventually grow to be
British
the
units. Okay, so
full-blown
yes.
Battle of Arras. And once again, Rommel ensured victory by capitalizing on the 38T's mobility and not depending upon their firepower and armor to bring victory. So whatever interpretation you ultimately take, what is undisputed is that things only got better for the 38T as the Battle of France continued. Following the collapse of the Northern Front and the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force via Dunkirk, Rommel's Panzer Division headed south and spearheaded the Fourth Army's breakthrough to the Seine River. In this engagement, the 38Ts had 460 French armor kills claimed.
460? Wow. That feels like a relatively high amount for a light armored tank like the Panzer 38T is.
And participated in operations that resulted in the capture of over 97,000 Allied prisoners to only 26 38Ts lost.
That is impressive, I feel like. Only 26 of them lost, that many people captured, and like, wow.
But this equates to a kill-to-loss ratio of over 17-1 for the 38.
17-1? That's insane! That feels so good. I mean, it's not good because it's war and people are dying, but like, oh my god.
Well, let's just
impressive.
Say that's rather good. So, the 38T's performance in France certainly backs our assertion. But this consistently good performance was not to last, as the tank encountered major issues during the invasion of the Soviet Union. Now, this may sound odd, given what we initially claimed about the 38T remaining viable throughout the war, but just bear with me for a second, it's all gonna fit together soon enough.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wait, if they...
As the invasion of the Soviet Union commenced in...
If the tank is gonna start having issues with the invasion of the Soviet Union, doesn't that mean that it's not gonna last through the whole war then? Well, he said he will explain. Let's keep going.
Yet more 38.
Whoa, what is that? I don't know if I've seen that before. Or is it just is that a tank? Is it some other kind of artillery piece? It is huge and really doesn't look like it's going to be easy to maneuver around places, if I'm honest.
The 80s have been churned out of the occupied Czechoslovakia.
That was an insane explosion.
Slovak factories, and it now equipped 5 out of the 17 German Panzer divisions, accounting for about 14%.
Look at how many people are riding on them. I guess the ground troops would like get on top of them when they were kind of vaguely safe to conserve their energy? Is that what's happening there?
The overall German tank strength. Against older, light Soviet tanks such as the T-26 and BT-7, it happily held its own, and it performed as well as it had in France and Poland. But, well, times have changed, and now light tanks such as those no longer made up the bulk of their opponents.
I was wondering, I did wonder when he said that it was going to last for so long. I'm like, but what happens when it starts going up against all the heavy tanks that they start making? Like, the T-34 and the Panther and like all of those, like what happens then?
Now they were having to face the formidable
T-34s
and KV-1, the former of which could match the speed of the 38T, but had more armor and had more firepower. The latter of these tanks was somewhat slower, but had significantly more armor.
Yeah, I don't know if I've actually seen the KV-1 before. It does look extremely armored though. My goodness, what a beast.
Armor and firepower, and there can only be so much you can outmaneuver a superior opponent until your thinner armor and smaller gun become problems that you can't work around. And in the T-34 and the KV-1, the 38T had reached that point. This is exemplified by the 38T's loss rate, which rocketed up compared to earlier campaigns. So bad was the situation, in fact, that by
Oh, look how broken down it is. That's so sad.
the end of August 1941, 27% of all 38Ts in service had been destroyed beyond repair.
27% of them? Wow, that's a big jump.
Another problem was that the enormous expanses of the Soviet front were pushing the reliability of the 38T to its limits. These conditions and the desperate need to cover as much of it as possible resulted in the neglecting of the 38.
That is such a shame to hear. Like, I know it happens regularly, like constantly vehicles, products, machines, etc. are all neglected over time. And people start just not caring as much about them. But it is kind of sad to hear, like, when a military is like, just push it a little while longer. We don't worry about it. It's gonna be fine. And then something like just absolutely breaks down and it ends up working an entire mission.
38T's maintenance. Time and time again, a German commander said, "It'll be fine, just get another day out of it, or we need to be there ASAP." But it was not.
That is the worst attitude to have. That is the worst attitude to have about it when you're dealing with, like, this kind of machine and what it is meant to do and who it's meant to protect.
Fact. Fine. And the dusty conditions and endless operating time began to take their toll on the little tanker. By September 1941, only 58% of 38Ts were fit for service at any given time. This only got worse as
Wow, only 58%, like just over half of them were actually still fit for service because of the sheer volume of neglect that they suffered. That sucks.
autumn turned into winter, and the 38T had to contend with something much worse than dust, but mud.
Ooh.
Mechanical losses soared alarmingly during this period, culminating in over 52 38Ts being abandoned due to mechanical.
Wow, so many abandoned. Also, that does look rough. Now, I would have thought that the larger wheels would have maybe helped against the mud, but I guess not, according to this.
Breakdown just in the case of the 7th Panzer Division alone. The Germans could read the writing on the wall, and at the start of 1942, the 38T began to be withdrawn from frontline service in favor of newer and more capable tanks. But this wasn't the end of the 38T story. The mid-century German regime was nothing if not pragmatic, and they were hardly going to let perfectly good hulls go to waste. It just needed a bit of a rethink to make it viable. Consequently, the 38.
Okay, so based on that sentence, what I assume he's about to go into is the fact that the 38T might be repurposed, and so like its hull, maybe some of its guns are still used, but it's put into other roles within the military.
T remained in frontline service till the end of the war in several different and highly modified forms.
Okay, so yeah, highly
now
modified.
Let's bring this chapter to a close and have a look at them, shall we?
A second life! All right.
The first variant of interest.
Oh my god. That is so cute. Why is its gun so big? It looks like it's gonna fall over a little bit. Like, I feel like if you put a little bit of weight on the tip of the gun, you could just like lift its butt up in the air. The Martyr 3, huh? Okay, I'm gonna have to look and see if there's a kit of that. That's too cute.
Is the Marder 3, a tank destroyer created by mating the venerable 38T chassis with a 75mm Pak-40 anti-tank gun, vastly surpassing the original tank's firepower. This was a very big gun for a chassis.
Oh, that's so cool. Look how, like, it moves. That's rad. Also, that is so much, like, dust that it produced just from firing.
Of that
and
size,
smoke, I guess,
and so
too.
it had no turret, instead having its gun fixed and only able to fire from a 30-degree arc. It performed admirably on the Eastern Front, punching above its weight and able to take on most tanks of the day at decent ranges. It wasn't perfect, however, and it suffered from a high silhouette and exposed fighting compartment that left its crew vulnerable.
Yeah, I did notice that the top of the tank seemed to be open, which does seem like it might be problematic.
1,700.
Yeah, look, see, he's just sitting there and his head is, like, perfectly exposed. I feel like that's detrimental. How often, I wonder, does that happen? Probably way more than I realize, isn't it? Like, you guys are in the comments are going to tell me that, like, that's very common, aren't you?
36
my
were
expectation.
produced between 1942 and 1944. The next variant of interest is the Jack the Panzer 38T, better known as the Hetzer. Debuting in 1944, it offered
I don't know what color that pattern is painted up in. I'm assuming greens, browns, and white, but for camouflage purposes. But I love that it looks like there are bones on it. Like they painted little bones and teeth. It almost feels like an orc has slowly started to like convert it. It's been looted, and that's what it feels like to me.
Significant improvements in armor and firepower compared to the original tank, packing a lethal 75mm Pak 39 gun into a compact, low-profile, sloped armored shell. The Hetzer proved itself a potent tank destroyer, with its main drawbacks being limited internal space, a result of incorporation.
I mean, look how sloped it is. Yeah, I could totally believe that. I assume that's what caused some of the discomfort in that other tank I was asking about too, because it also looked like it had a very sloped chassis and therefore probably a very just like you're bent in half a lot, unfortunately. Like your just back is bent all the time when you're inside the tank, which does sound very uncomfortable.
Using such heavily sloped armor on such a small chassis. It was also the most produced variant of the 38D, with 2,827 of them being produced between 1944 and 1945. Next, there's the Flak Panzer 38D.
Oh, I like that too. It also looks like it's going to tip over, but the other direction because its butt is so big. That is a great tank.
38D chassis adapted for anti-aircraft duties.
Anti-aircraft.
2cm Flak 38 gun, this variant excelled in the protection of ground units from low-flying aircraft and infantry. However, only 141 were produced due to a shift in resources that prioritized other combat vehicles. And then there was the SD KFZ 138/1 Grill, a 38T derived self-propelled artillery piece armed with a hefty 15cm SIG 33 infantry.
Whoa, that is a large gun. And I like how it just keeps getting bigger, actually. I feel like it's just growing in size.
Gun. 389 were produced in total, and it offered a solid blend of mobility and punch, providing much-needed artillery support in a variety of scenarios. While the earlier version had an open-topped fighting compartment similar to the Marder III, the later model introduced an enclosed superstructure, offering better protection for the crew. These variants.
I can definitely see how an enclosed superstructure would probably better protect the crew than an open-topped one. I just feel like open-topped are probably never very good, but again, that kind of makes me, feel like they could be looted by orcs very easily.
Variants, which on the whole were really successful, formed the crux of our arguments for the 38T being one of the most underrated tanks of the war. Sure, by 1942, the pure 38T was long obsolete, but because of these variants, it has a successful combat record throughout the entire war. And, well, how many other tanks can really say that?
I would actually love to know, because he's implying that not many can, but I assume there are some of you out there in my community, in my comments, you've been into tanks from like day one and you know so much. So please tell me if there are others that you think would qualify for this that have made it through like the entirety of the war.
Alright, so, having completed our extensive overview of the 38T, we find ourselves back at the claim that we made at the beginning of the video, that the 38T is the most underrated tank of the war. Look, despite being a pre-war design from a small nation, it played an essential role in Germany's war effort from start to finish.
I would agree with that. Like, everything that he has put out there, provided that it's accurate, and I do trust Megaprojects, like, they put a lot of research into their videos, so I suspect that he is accurate with the timeline of how much this tank actually was used. And I really do think it's quite underrated. The fact that we don't see much about it, the fact that I hadn't heard about it or anything prior to me having accidentally picked it up thinking it was a Panzer I and building it, I would agree.
Certainly, it's not the only tank to have completed the feat, as the Panzer IV, following extensive upgrades, also served the German military for the entire duration of the war. But
to be fair, the Panzer line was the one that I was thinking of when he claimed that. I was like, I thought the Panzer line saw its way through the entirety of the war. That's like when it was most popular and most predominant, so.
Difference is that while in documentaries, books, and online discussion you'll find no shortage of love for the Panzer IV, and while the 38T is by no means unknown, the appreciation of it is just way less.
Yes, the appreciation of it is way less. I would also agree that it's definitely not unknown, because good lord, the number of people of you in the comments who knew about it and were telling me all about it was really cool.
Furthermore, the case with the 38D as the most underrated tank of World War II requires a deeper consideration of how we define underratedness. Many tend to judge a tank's value solely on its firepower, armor protection, and operational agility. And while these metrics...
I mean, I do think those are valid metrics, but I assume he's about to be like, they're not everything.
Do have their place, there is more to consider for underratedness. The concept of underratedness is multidimensional, involving historical visibility, popular recognition, and professional appreciation. Tanks that typically hog the limelight often have dramatic narratives or iconic appearances associated.
We talked about that literally earlier in the video. Yeah, like the ones that are more iconic do have these really big dramatic moments that makes everybody remember them. And while I think the Panzer 38T was in some bigger battles, I don't think they were in any of the major battles as a major player, therefore getting any of that spotlight.
Associated with them, yet this celebrity status can sometimes inflate their perceived effectiveness or strategic importance and give them popular reputations they really don't deserve. On the other hand, tanks like the 38T, which have received none of this fanfare, have very low hurdles to jump to be able to be considered underrated, and after our investigation today, there could be little doubt that it cleanly clears that hurdle. The 38T, with its modest design of firepower, fails to leave a striking visual imprint upon our collective memory. It neither represented.
I love the look of this particular tank. I did see this one when I was doing my research on how I should paint up my Panzer, and I almost went with this design, but I saw so much more of the classic blue look that I ended up going with that I decided to go with this. But I almost did this. I don't know where this is from specifically in regards to like who painted this up and when it would have been painted in these colors, but I do really like it.
The supposed epitome of German engineering like the Tiger, nor did it embody a nation's industrial might like the American Sherman. Consequently, it fades into the background of the grand narrative of World War II.
All right, and that has been it for our watch along with Megaprojects, discussing whether or not the Panzer 38T is the most underrated World War II tank. And personally, I kind of think that it at least might be, in my opinion, right now. I don't know that much about a lot of the other more underrated tanks in World War II, but I might be a little bit biased towards the 38T just because I did, in fact, build one. And I really learned a lot from that. I have a lot more things that I can now like dive into in research because that's given me a little bit of guidance, which was really cool. And I hope you guys enjoyed exploring the 38T with me. I thought this would be a really good way to wrap everything up. And I'm happy with it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we would not be doing this. So thank you very, very much. In the meantime, I have been Angela, and I hope you all have a wonderful hobby night. See you next time.